Remember that popular saying about the friend of your friend being your friend? Turns out that someone connected to your roommate can bring unexpected danger. For 2 years, I shared a small house near our old college campus with my former roommate, Chad. Even though we had spent a year as college roommates before moving in together, we weren't particularly close. Our post-college plans happened to align, and living together seemed convenient at the time. The first year went smoothly. We became closer and genuinely enjoyed each other's company, enough so that we decided to renew the lease for another year. That renewal happened in June, roughly 2 months after signing the lease extension. One night, after a typical late shift at work, I returned home and chatted with Chad for a while before we both turned in. But in the middle of the night, I was startled awake by the sound of floorboards creaking in the hallway. The steps were slow, deliberate, moving toward the main part of the house. I glanced at the clock. It was 3 a.m. I assumed Chad was up getting a drink or moving around for some other reason. I didn't dwell on it and tried to go back to sleep. The next morning, I was rushing to get to work early. As I left, Chad opened his bedroom door, looking exhausted, and asked something I wasn't expecting. What I was doing walking around the house in the middle of the night. I froze. I told him I hadn't been walking and that I thought I'd heard him moving. The conversation ended there, with both of us confused since I had to leave for work. I rationalized it as the wooden floors of the house creaking and assumed I'd probably heard wrongly. That evening, when I returned home, Chad was at work. I spent the night relaxing in my room and eventually went to bed around the same time as the night before. Again, at about 3 a.m., the floorboards began to creak. This time, I stayed awake and listened closely. The sound resembled someone pacing slowly down the hallway towards the living room. When the noise reached the far side of the house, it paused. After about 30 seconds of silence, I decided to investigate. I walked to the living room, but Chad wasn't there. There was nothing in the room that could explain the noise. I returned to my bedroom and tried to sleep, but I couldn't get the thoughts of something or someone moving about the house. Had we welcomed rats as roommates sometime within the past week without me noticing? I mentioned it to Chad the next morning, but neither of us had an answer. Chad had the day off, but I had to leave for work at 2 p.m., returning home close to 11 p.m. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed Chad sitting on his bed, still awake. I called out casually as I passed his door, "What's up?" but received no response. I thought perhaps he hadn't heard me. I went into my room, changed out of my work clothes, and headed to the kitchen for a snack. When I passed his room again, the light was off. I peeked inside. He was still on the bed in the corner, barely visible in the dark. "Hey Chad, you okay?" I asked again. No response. After a few seconds, I moved to the kitchen. Something about the silence felt wrong, but I didn't want to intrude. 15 minutes later, I returned to my room. Chad's door was closed. Roughly an hour later, I heard it again, the slow creaking of floorboards in the hallway. I glanced at my bedroom door and saw movement under it. Given my recent odd encounters with Chad, I decided to text him instead of investigating. I asked if he was walking around. Minutes passed before he responded. A question mark came first, then, "What do you mean? I'm not home right now." My face drained of color. I bolted into the hallway. No one was there, yet Chad's bedroom door was now open. I lingered silently, listening. Nothing. Cautiously, I approached and peered inside. In the center of the pitch-black room stood an unfamiliar man. Even in the darkness, I could make out that he was taller than Chad and had a thick beard, features Chad did not possess. Without thinking, I ran out of the house and called the police from across the street. By the time they arrived, the intruder had vanished. Strangely, there were no clear signs of entry or exit. The only thing slightly suspicious was a partially unlocked window that didn't appear recently disturbed. The most unsettling realization was that this man had likely been responsible for the nightly creaking for several days, meaning he had been inside while we slept. The thought of him sitting on Chad's bed, seemingly waiting for something, was even more disturbing. What made it creepier was that this had happened on Chad's day off, when he would have been alone for most of the night. It made me think the man somehow knew this and intentionally waited to catch Chad unprepared. That could explain why he was focused on Chad's room and not aware. Thankfully, Chad had gone out to hang with a friend. Whatever the intruder's intentions were, we'll probably never find out. Have you ever tried bonding with a roommate only to find out that sometimes the enemy you should beware of is the very same enemy you live with? That was exactly what happened to me after I graduated from college. This all took place in my early 20s. At that time, I lived in a small house with 3 other guys. None of us really knew each other well before moving in, but we all attended the same college and graduated around the same time. When it came time to find a place to live after school, it seemed natural for the 4 of us to team up. We split the rent 4 ways, which made it manageable to afford a modest house on the rural outskirts of the city. Closer to town was prohibitively expensive, so this seemed like a reasonable compromise. For the first 9 months or so, everything went fairly smoothly. But quite suddenly, 2 of the guys decided to move out, leaving just Jackson and me. The problem was that Jackson was the one roommate I hadn't really bonded with. He was always busy with work, coming home late, or avoiding social interaction altogether. It wasn't ideal that the other 2 left, because it meant the 2 of us had to cover the rent on our own, a situation we couldn't sustain for long. We eventually agreed that when the lease ended in 3 months, we would go our separate ways and leave the house. The first month after the 2 left, Jackson's absence became extremely noticeable. On my days off, I found myself alone for long stretches of time, day and night. It was a stark contrast to the liveliness when the other 2 were around. I didn't mind the solitude too much. In fact, I enjoyed having the space to myself. Still, I couldn't help noticing how often he was gone. Despite working only part-time in the mornings, he seemed to vanish every evening. I assumed he must be out with friends or running errands late into the night. The house itself added to the unsettling feeling. Small noises like the hum of the fridge or the wind tapping against the windows sounded ominous when the house was empty. I began noticing how different the space felt when Jackson wasn't around. Then one night, I stayed up later than usual. Around 1 a.m., I saw headlights flash across my window as a car rolled down the gravel driveway. A moment later, the front door opened. For some reason, I felt compelled to greet him, just to maintain some semblance of normalcy. I opened my bedroom door, and immediately I was startled by the sound of hurried footsteps racing down the hallway. When I peeked out, Jackson froze, caught off guard just outside his bedroom door. The hallway lights were off, making it hard to see him clearly, but I noticed the wide-eyed expression on his face, the rigidness in his posture. "What's up, Jackson? Just checking how you're doing?" I said casually, hoping to break the tension. He didn't move at first, then muttered, "I'm good." A few seconds of awkward silence passed before I stepped back into my room. The moment felt strange, unsettling in a way I couldn't shake. Why was he acting like this? Why hurry into his room and freeze like that? I didn't want to pry, but it left me feeling uneasy. I remember sitting on my bed for a long time afterward, staring at the dark hallway, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe he was just startled by the noise I made. Maybe he was stressed, or anxious, or tired. But deep down, I knew that explanation didn't feel right. There was a rigidity in his movements, a strange urgency in his body language, something deeply unnatural in the way he stared. Every creak of the floorboards after that made my stomach tighten, and I found myself glancing at his door more often than I'd care to admit. my mind spinning through all the possibilities of what could be going on. After a couple of minutes, I decided to check quietly. I opened my door and slowly walked down the hallway, just trying to hear what he was doing, not to confront him. As I passed his room, I heard the sound of drawers being opened and closed frantically, a rustling that felt almost deliberate. I froze, leaning closer, trying to make sense of it. The noise continued, escalating my unease until suddenly it stopped. Silence enveloped the space. I stood there, unsure what to do next, my instincts screaming at me to leave the hallway. Just as I took a tentative step back, his door swung open, and there he was, standing in the darkness, eyes wide and restless, staring directly at me. Trying to act casual, I said, "I'm just heading to the kitchen. Do you want anything?" Jackson muttered no and shut the door, leaving me unsettled. His behavior was deeply disturbing. I went into the kitchen to follow through with my offer, and then returned to my room, but he remained silent for the rest of the night. I couldn't sleep for hours, listening intently for any sound. My mind played over every interaction we'd had since the other two roommates moved out. His absence, the frantic movements, the sudden freezes. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't understand. Every time I heard the faintest noise, a tap against the window, the wind scraping a branch against the siding, I jumped, my heart racing. The house, normally a safe space, suddenly felt like a trap, every shadow a potential threat. Over the following 5 or 6 days, I found myself monitoring him more closely. I stayed up until I knew he was safely in his room, observing his increasingly distant and vacant demeanor. He barely spoke, kept to his room, and moved with a strange urgency that grew more unnerving with each passing day. Then one night, as I tried to sleep, there was a knock on my door. It startled me. I hadn't heard him walk down the hallway. When I opened the door, he stood there, restless eyes and an unfamiliar, partial smile on his face. He explained he'd just gotten home and thought he might have dropped his wallet somewhere along the driveway. He asked if I could grab a flashlight and help him search. I felt uneasy. He had never asked for help or included me in anything before. Still, I decided to go along, thinking it might be an opportunity to smooth things over. We stepped outside, and I immediately noticed his car was parked far down the driveway, oddly distant for no apparent reason. If his wallet had truly fallen, it should have been nearby. He led me further away from the car, deeper toward the woods behind the property. I shone the flashlight across the ground, but saw nothing. "Why are we going this far?" I asked. He hesitated, then said he had walked a short distance earlier and might have lost it there. His explanation made little sense. The further he led me, the more my nerves spiked. "Here," I said finally. "Take the flashlight. I'm heading back. I have to get up early for work." He didn't accept it. His smile faded, replaced with something darker, disappointment, then anger. He said nothing, but the tension was suffocating. I turned and hurried back toward the house, glancing over my shoulder to see him standing motionless, watching. Once inside, I packed my essentials. I didn't sleep that night, ears straining for any sound. Jackson never returned. The next morning, I left, driving away with my belongings. Years later, I never heard from him again, and I never discovered what he had intended that night in the woods. The entire experience left me shaken. Something about the way he had acted, his restless eyes, his insistence on taking me outside, felt far from normal. I can only assume he had planned something sinister, and I narrowly avoided whatever it was. There are all sorts of roommates in this world, but I'll advise that if you're ever in need of one, don't make the same mistake I did. Turning to the internet for one. In 2015, when I was 23, I decided to search Craigslist for a roommate to share my apartment. At the time, it felt like a perfectly ordinary thing to do. Craigslist was widely used for finding roommates, and there really weren't many alternatives available. Unlike today, it wasn't saturated with scams or people trying to exploit the system. I posted a listing that included several photos of my apartment and made it clear I was looking for a roommate close to my age, someone around 23 like me. Within a few days, I received a response from a woman named Debbie. She said she was also 23 and still attending college. From the conversation we had on the phone, she seemed remarkably similar to me. Our routines, habits, and lifestyle preferences aligned well. It felt like we could actually be compatible roommates. I scheduled a time for her to come by and see the apartment in person. When she arrived, everything appeared fine. Debbie liked the place immediately, and we agreed on a price. Within a week, she had moved in with me. I did notice something about her appearance, though. She appeared more matured than I expected. She was slightly taller than I was, and carried a maturity in her features that made her seem older than 23. I didn't give it much thought at the time, assuming she just had a naturally older look. The first few days passed, and we didn't really get a chance to settle in together. I had work, and she balanced both college and a job, so our paths rarely crossed. Then came the 5th night after she moved in. I returned home from work around 10 p.m., and the moment I opened the door, I heard hurried footsteps rushing down the hallway, immediately followed by the sharp slam of a door. Startled, I dropped my bag and peered down the hallway that led to both of our rooms. Her door was closed, the light on inside, but my own door stood wide open. I was certain I had closed it before leaving that morning, and the sight made my stomach churn. I wasn't comfortable with the idea of someone being in my room without my permission. I quickly shut the door behind me and inspected the room. Nothing appeared out of place, no sign of anything touched or disturbed, so I tried to push the unease aside and went about my night. I settled on the bed and turned on the TV for a while. Debbie remained silent in her room for over an hour, so I assumed she was asleep. As she had mentioned, she preferred to go to bed early. But while absent-mindedly glancing at my bedroom door, I noticed something that made my stomach tightened with fear. A shadow beneath the crack. I could tell someone was standing behind my door. How long had she, or whoever it was, been there? "Debbie?" I called softly. No movement. I tried again, louder this time. "Debbie, are you out there?" The seconds dragged on, oppressive and tense. Then, very slowly, the shadow shifted, moving down the hallway, and I heard her bedroom door slam behind her. My heart began to pound. What could she have been doing? I locked my door immediately and stayed awake a little longer than usual, my mind racing. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I went to bed. The next morning, I passed by Debbie in the kitchen. I brought up the previous night casually, asking if she had needed something. She smiled and said everything was fine, ending the conversation abruptly. Odd, certainly, but I didn't press it. I didn't want to create tension so early into her stay. Debbie left shortly afterward, and I went to work a few hours later. That night, I returned home around 10:30 p.m. The apartment was quiet and dark, the lights off even in her room. I assumed she had gone to bed. I quietly entered my bedroom and closed the door behind me, hoping not to disturb her. After a brief FaceTime with a friend, I stepped into the shower to unwind, planning to go straight to bed afterward. Mid-shower, I thought I heard a faint noise outside my room. I lowered the water pressure to listen carefully, but hearing nothing else, continued with my routine. When I finished, I stepped out, dried off, and glanced toward the hallway. My door was ajar. My heart raced. I dressed quickly and checked the hallway, still dark. Debbie wasn't moving, not a sound from her room. My stomach twisted with unease. I closed and locked my door firmly. I was fairly certain I had locked it when I first came home, so this was unsettling. And even more disconcerting. Had she even opened it? Or had someone else? The apartment remained silent, as if untouched, the darkness complete. What in the world was happening? I stayed up for another hour, attempting to watch TV and calm my nerves, but the fear lingered. I barely knew Debbie well enough to make sense of any of this. I tried rationalizing it, telling myself maybe she came to ask something but left when she realized I was in the shower. Yet that theory didn't account for the other odd occurrences over the past few nights. Finally, I knew I needed rest. I shut off everything, crawled under the covers, and closed my eyes. Moments after dozing off, I felt awake again, disoriented. I rolled over and looked around the pitch-black room. Silence enveloped the apartment, not even a whisper from the neighbors, only the faint, eerie creak of the old building. And then I noticed it. My door was cracked open just a few inches. Terrifying. I knew without a doubt I had locked it, and I had not heard it open. "Debbie," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The stillness seemed amplified, every second stretching into eternity. My eyes adjusted, and I scanned the room. In the corner, I could make out her figure near the wardrobe. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, staring. My heart hammered against my chest. Each passing second made it worse, the dread building until she finally took a step forward. I could make out the contours of her face now, a completely empty expression, eyes like she was looking straight through me. She stepped again, then suddenly bolted across the room into the hallway. A moment later, her bedroom door slammed shut. I grabbed my phone and car keys and sprinted to the front door, escaping the apartment entirely. Even though she hadn't physically harmed me, I was terrified. I didn't linger in the parking lot. I feared she might come after me. I drove to a nearby neighborhood, parked, and called the police. It took roughly 15 minutes for them to arrive. By then, Debbie was gone. She had taken most of her belongings and vanished without a trace. As we tried to contact her and piece together her identity, we realized that all the information she had given me was fabricated. Even her name was false. Her phone was a prepaid burner with no identifying details. This was 2015. Even a decade later, I've never heard from her again. I can't help but think she had disturbing intentions had I continued living with her. So many questions remain, and no real answers. After that terrifying experience, I moved apartments, constantly on edge that she might reappear when I least expected it.